Okay, good morning again. And here we are in Genesis chapter 21, the birth of Isaac. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said. Finally, as he had said. And so many times we feel like the Lord's promises are never going to come true, never going to come to pass in our lives. But it's always in the timing of the Lord so that he will receive all of the glory. And the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time that God had promised him. At the very time. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. So Isaac was the first one to be circumcised on the 8th day, because all the other men in Abraham's life were men or young men at the time of the original circumcision time. And so this is the first one that he's able to go ahead and circumcise as an infant. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And her laughter has changed from being incredulous to the same joy that Abraham was having when he first heard about it. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet I have borne him a son in his old age. What a huge rejoicing for her. Now the child grew and was weaned. This would have been probably 3 years old, maybe as much as 4, maybe as old as 5, depending on how long she lasted through it. But they didn't wean their kids, when they were 9 months old or a year like many do now. This would have been a long, several years process. But on the day that Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abram, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son, Ishmael. But God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. So this is a great promise. And of course, Ishmael, the Arab nations, they trace themselves back to Ishmael, and the people who are Muslims trace their lineage back to Ishmael. And because of this, him being the oldest son, that is the conflict we have today over the land that was promised to Abraham. That's why the Muslims believe it belongs to them, because their forefather was the oldest son. And so this was Abraham and Sarah's way of fulfilling God's promises to them, which of course brought trouble to them, but also it continues to bring us trouble today. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water and skin was gone, she put the boy underneath one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down with about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And she sat there and she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave to the boy to drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got him a wife for him from Egypt. This is a celebrated part of the great religious holiday that the Muslims have. Part of this is the revering of Hagar and what she did. But I think it's very interesting that the Jews and the Christians, women that are Jews and Christians, they go with their heads uncovered, and the Muslims, their women are covered. And I believe that this is connected to the slave idea, that she was a slave woman and their mother continues to be a slave to them, where with Abraham and Sarah, she was free, and we received that freedom through her as the wife of the promise. But the conflict that ensued because of what Abraham and Sarah did, of course, we continue to pay for it today. But isn't it interesting and beautiful that the Lord's promises were still intact for Abraham? We see him falter again and again. We see he and Sarah not get it right, and yet the Lord continued to use them and use them to the full. And so as we walk in our lives, when I feel like, I've faltered with old fears, or I've faltered with this sin that just doesn't seem to ever go out of my life. This thing with Hagar and Ishmael was never okay. But Ishmael and Isaac later, when Abraham dies, they're together and they bury their father. So there was still communication after the boys were grown. So it wasn't a total severing. So the Lord was gracious to them even in their lifetimes. And I believe the Lord continues to call Muslims and Jews to follow him. Not Muslims in the way that they have to falsely follow God, but the Lord is calling them through visions and dreams and drawing them to Jesus as their Savior. And I praise his name for that, because the Lord is still into redemption of all of Abraham's children, of which we get to participate. So next time, here in a couple of minutes if you're watching live, but we're going to go ahead and go into Abraham being tested, and that is going to be amazing. So y'all hang on.